if you would just ask someone on the street whether a living organism or a machine are the same, I feel like it's something where actually scientists get a bit blindsided by their own concepts, because most people would laugh at you for the question, right? Like someone who's not educated in computer science, if you would ask a dog or the computer, is it fundamentally the same? They would just be like, what is wrong with you, right? But if you're very, very educated in your concepts, that you see a lot through that lens, then you also become somewhat blind to it, which I'm like, I don't want to be critical about, like, I don't want to, what is it, embarrass someone who thinks that way. I think it's very, very normal that as a scientist, you have to take your concepts very seriously. But sometimes, because you look so strongly through one lens, you will distort some real things. I think science can actually make you dumber in some domains of life, because you adopt very strong stances that do also influence your outside worldview.
Hi everyone, my name is Balázs Kegel and this is the I Scientist podcast, where we explore artificial intelligence, the body and the soul. And today it's my great pleasure to host Anna Riedl. Anna is a cognitive scientist working on rationality and rationality under radical uncertainty. And I will ask her what it exactly means, but it's basically a subject that's super interesting for two reasons for me. One is that I'm an AI researcher, and we all know that AI got this lab leak, now it's everywhere, large language models, and they give us sort of mirror on what we know about cognition. So part of my interest is about Anna's expertise and its interaction with AI, and the other is like psychology. So a lot of things that Anna is working on is very relevant to how we live our lives. So these two will be our topics today. So hi Anna, how are you today?
Hi, pretty good and excited to be here.
Thank you. Me too. There are a lot of topics. I just finished your recent paper, which is really heavy, but very well written. It's just a lot of stuff. It's more than 10% novelty for me. So I need digestion on this. We will go into some of the parts of that paper. We'll see if we can cover to the end, or maybe we can come back for another discussion. But let's start with something basic, like who are you and what are you doing?
Two heavy existential questions. Who am I? What am I doing? So I studied cognitive science, that is relevant in this context, at the University of Vienna. And before that, I studied psychology. And other than that, I was heavily involved with the effective altruism community, and also did a lot of science communication, where I basically taught rationality to anyone who was interested.
Okay. So I know you from, I saw you first in Voices of Vervaeke. So you discussed with John Vervaeke your work on rationality, and you seemed to have a good time. And I think your collaboration started there, or maybe started before. And you
Yes,
just
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. In the podcast we also mentioned it. So I got in touch with him because I was working on my master thesis, where I was exploring the topic of rationality, and there was, or still is, this huge divide that was even debated in various great rationality debates between the axiomatic and the ecological approach. And I was really grappling with this gap. And in the end, I stumbled upon his work on the concept of relevance realization, and it just perfectly fit. It was exactly what I needed. And as I already had written a long argumentation, I basically reached out and was like, hey, we should publish this together. And he was very excited about it. And that's how we got to know each other.
I see. So and that collaboration led to the 2022 paper, or the one that just got.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Both. Yes.
Both. I see. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Because
Wonderful.
my actual supervisor, Johannes Jäger, who's a theoretical biologist and I guess complexity scientist and geneticist, my work, so originally we did not have so much in common, or like I was mostly interested in working with him because he was just a very precise thinker and also a very passionate thinker. So I basically was in a seminar by him, and what really stood out was that everyone stayed longer than was necessary. So we had such lively discussions that just people stayed, I think, like over an hour more than we had to. And it was just very engaging, and I learned a lot about philosophy of science that really heavily like unconfused me. So I really wanted to work with him. But then over time, it turned out that actually my work on rationality and the difference between small and large worlds were extremely relevant for his arguments around what the differences between organisms and machines are.
Okay, so I see now. I see how the paper got. I see. Okay, okay, beautiful. So I would say let's start with the basics, because if I talk to people in AI, I think this distinction between intelligence and rationality doesn't even register, or it registers for very few people, and especially the relatively low correlation between intelligence and rationality that we have in humans. That are, you know, the things are defined and measured with tools of social science, and I think that the correlation is like 0.3, right? So let's define those concepts. What is intelligence and what is rationality from your point of view?
So actually, I don't know what the correlation is, and I think it really heavily depends on the definitions. Because when you read an AI intro book like Russell and Norvig, then actually they would define rationality as the goal of artificial intelligence. So rationality is basically what we try to build there. And also historically, it was debated whether to call the field computational rationality instead of artificial intelligence. So that was basically a 50-50 chance how it would be called. So depending on the context where you use the words, it can mean basically exactly the same thing. But of course, in psychology, it's again defined differently, where intelligence and rationality are different things. So in psychology, intelligence means something like your maximum processing power, cognitively, and rationality means, well, doing the right thing, doing what is instrumentally correct to reach a goal. And those, I do think I would say they're heavily correlated, but they're definitely not the same, because often, for example, to overcome certain problems, it's more important how much you use your intelligence on average, so your need for cognition, rather than the pure intelligence you have. So that's all work by Keith Stanovich. He has written on all those effects a lot.
So isn't there a component of rationality where it's not only the goal you reach, but which goal to reach? Like
Probably as well.
like I give you like, let's say intelligence is my capacity to solve a problem,
yes,
a complex problem, and rationality also includes what is the problem that I need to solve to reach a goal.
100%. I mean, the more technical notion is just like the maximizing utility. And then, of course, you have to think back from that, what that means, like how do you realize in the world and what problems do you concretely have to solve to get it? Yes.
And that leads to this distinction between small and large worlds, which for me it's maybe the if I defined them, it would be more like closed and open worlds. But let's stick with the small and large worlds, because I feel that like in the small world, the two collapse on the same thing. But when you define the large world where we live in as living organisms, the two can diverge. So what is this distinction between small and large worlds?
When you look historically at the research on rationality, one approach that was used was typically the axiomatic approach, which meant basically if you behave in accordance to probability theory and logic, then you behave as if you're maximizing utility. And it got tested by various small kind of puzzles where you tested whether you would come to the right conclusions. But of course, it was always very abstracted problems where, well, the context was completely neglected. And then it completely relied on you solving those very, very propositional problems. And when you go actually even further back in history and look at the founding materials of even Bayesian decision theory, then even Savage himself said, well, all those principles defined here, they only apply in small abstracted worlds, like idealized abstracted worlds, where you can look before you leap, right? You can completely abstract the problem and then you can calculate the right thing to do. And in the real world, of course, it's very different because you have a computational explosion, a combinatorial explosion, and it's very, very difficult to calculate in any situation what the best thing to do is, where of course the term heuristics come in, like shortcuts, approximations to what you should be doing. But exactly, so in the real world, you cannot just use Bayesian statistics to calculate the next thing to do and so forth. So it's just very different problem spaces.
So isn't it about the framing problem? So for any formal reasoning system or Bayesian probabilistic calculus, which I love, by the way, you need to have a space where your variables are already well defined. Of course, you learn, but you learn in that space, whereas in real life, for all purposes, the number of variables is too large to start with, right?
Yes. That is the argument we make, that it is about the frame problem. So underlying the frame problem are various other assumptions. So one very typical idea is the idea of the pre-given world, right? So I am in one specific situation right now. There is an objective given environment, but of course that is not true, right? I'm in an infinite amount of situations right now, right? So you could, I think Karl Popper says the same in the myth of the framework, right? So for example, when you look at your train ticket, you can ask yourself, well, is that a historical document? And then you would say, well, not really, right? Usually it doesn't matter, you just throw it away. But given that day, someone specific bought it, it could also be a historical document. It depends on many, many external variables. And similarly, right? So what me having a podcast with you could turn out later to, I don't know, be a very like political statement, right? So let's say in 10 years, I go into politics and then we figure out, oh, today was this very important protest and I didn't attend. So me being here right now was me making a political statement in retrospect, right? So what a situation means can really change depending on context and depending on like how things develop and by who looks at it, right? So there's an infinity of meanings, and we have to, it's not just passively given, but we have to construct the meaning or make sense out of the situation, or exactly the world is not well posed and we have to pose it well.
Yes, and I think that the main claim that I actually put it on Twitter today is that you make is that this process of finding the relevant features, which are situation dependent, goal dependent, so depend on you, depend on the environment you are in, so constantly changing, that process is not computational. And as a consequence, consciousness, natural agency, cognition are not computational. And of course, when I say this, it triggered quite a bit of backlash, because when people say something not computational, it's the first thing you would think about is the special sauce, right? It's
Yes.
a non-physical sauce. And it's so interesting for me because this means that we take it for granted that physical processes are computational. The Church Turing thesis, like it was a God-given truth. So if somebody denies that some processes are not computational, you would think that person also says it's not physical. So you have like some kind of supernatural thing. Whereas I think in the paper what you claim is it is physical but not computational, right?
Yes, so,
exactly.
Yeah, I can
walk me through that argument, because I find it super interesting, and everything is sort of like is built on this claim.
Yeah, I first want to like zoom out a bit and first say I can really relate to someone who has the first reaction of, oh, this seems absurd, or like I think someone even posted on Twitter, it's like naive or something. And of course, that historically again makes complete sense because there were many movements where people just claimed like vitalism, right? There's this magic source in things that are alive, where which has happened again and again, where you make spiritual claims. It's similar, for example, when you make the argument that organisms are teleological, right? They have goals. Then people also often have like a strong reaction to it. Why? Because anything teleological was usually associated with very religious ideas. So we actually first had to get ideas like this completely out of the discourse to make it naturalistic. So we get the religion out of the discussion, and now we can, from a naturalistic perspective, again take the idea seriously that, well, maybe organisms do actually have goals, which they do, and maybe living systems are different from machines, which they are, right? Not because there's a magic essence, but just because they have a different structure, they behave differently, and it's very empirically observable, right? You can check for yourself. There's just things machines cannot do, and living organisms can do. And also, I think it's also something where if you would just ask someone on the street whether a living organism or a machine are the same, I feel like it's something where actually scientists get a bit blindsided by their own concepts, because most people would laugh at you for the question, right? Like someone who's not educated in computer science, if you would ask a dog or the computer, is it fundamentally the same? They would just be like, what is wrong with you, right? But if you're very, very educated in your concepts, that you see a lot through that lens, then you also become somewhat blind to it, which I don't want to be critical about. Like, I don't want to, embarrass someone who thinks that way. I think it's very, very normal that as a scientist, you have to take your concepts very seriously. But sometimes, because you look so strongly through one lens, you will distort some real things. I think science can actually make you dumber in some domains of life, because you adopt very strong stances that do also influence your outside worldview.
Yes, it reminds me to my partner who's a singer, and when I come to her with with my discoveries of John Vervaeke, who says not all knowledge is propositional and cognition is embodied, she laughs. Yeah, okay, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I also understand the other point you make, that I mean that's the role of science, is to take things apart and try to see if those everyday obviousnesses are, whether they are true or not.
Yes, and
So
of
it's
course, it's at the very center, for example, of cognitive science, to treat machines and brains and minds as something that inherently has something in common, right? Like information processing or cognition is a very broad concept, and we try to build machines that do things that, well, biological systems usually do, namely think. So of course it is all very related, because we actually strive for achieving this, but this doesn't mean that we are there, or that all parts are the same, which they're not. Yes. If you want to create an intelligent biological system, then you have to have children, right? Which is a very, very different process.
Yes, and what I see a little bit today in AI is that the boundary between machines and organisms are constantly pushed back. We can do more and more machine-like. What we thought before was completely of the organismic realm.
Yeah.
And so that's why I find these times are super exciting, because you get GPT, and suddenly it can do reasoning and stuff that is really weird with respect to the way it works and the way it was optimized and for what it was optimized for. So it's super interesting to see this boundary moving, but most of the time pushed back towards organisms. So I also understand people who see this dynamic and say then it can be pushed to infinity. That means all organisms will be at a certain time. We don't know how to do it now, but at a certain time they will be reproduced by machines. And in the paper, you definitely say that, well, you don't really say that it's not possible to do this artificially, but you make very strong claims about its embodiment, and that it has to be a physical, non-computational system. There's no metaphysical reasons why we couldn't do it artificially, but there are very strong claims why we could not do it in the current way we are doing it, where we put in algorithms on computers. So let's go a little bit through this these arguments. What do you call algorithms and organisms? So what are the main similarities and differences? And before you answer this question, let me. So I'm working in AI, and one of my main directions is reinforcement learning, especially model-based reinforcement learning, which is actually quite. So the boundary in reinforcement learning is really pushed towards organisms compared to, let's say, the learning algorithms we use in GPT or supervised learning or sort of like propositional learning, where we have a table of facts and we learn them and generalize from them, but it's really just a prediction. So in reinforcement learning, we do have a lot of concepts that you have in the paper that are attached to organisms. So we have in reinforcement learning, we have an environment and we have agents. And the agent's goal is not necessarily just predicting stuff from past experience, but to reach a goal. So you also have this goal-directed objective of the algorithms that you specify as the engineer. So that goal is usually not discovered by the agents, but given from the outside, and this will be a big difference, I think. But still, you have an agent. The agent senses the environment. The environment has states. The agent has sensors. The states come in. It can even do selection, even though these states is usually small worldish state, let's say a fixed set of features that you sense. And then based on your states, so of course the agent can also have internal states if it's a physical machine. And based on the internal and external states that it sees, it decides to do something. And when it does something, it can move itself in physical space or in some kind of a computational space towards the goal it wants to achieve. And reinforcement learning solves, or it aims to solve the problem of having a long-term goal and what to do short-term to reach that, how to propagate the long-term goal back short-term. And that's how, for example, AlphaGo worked, or all the reinforcement learning algorithms that work on games work. But there's also another concept which is similar to what you will talk about in the paper, which is that in one of the branches of reinforcement learning, it's called model-based reinforcement learning, which is it's a branch which is very much more sample efficient than the usual what we call model-free reinforcement learning. The way it works is that it's not only trying to predict or trying to construct the action, the next action given the state as a black box, but it first takes the state and learns how the world works, what we call a model. So it's like an internal representation of how the states that the agent will see will evolve if it does actions. And once you have this model, you can close your eyes and literally think. So what thinking means in that plan, or plan, it means that within the model you try the actions and you see where it goes. And then based on those planning, you end up with one action that you actually execute, and then of course you get the real feedback from the system. And those elements are already pretty far from supervised learning and getting closer to organisms. So this is the way I'm so long on this, because this is my stance. This is where I'm standing as an AI researcher, that this part is already formalized, and we know there's a lot of research, but formally we know how to do this. Of course, we have to find the right algorithms, and there are a lot of research in this space of algorithms, how to do it the most efficiently or how to solve real problems. But from the formal point of view, an agent with a predictive model that tries to project in the world and then correct its model when it sees that the model doesn't work, and then does action and then goes towards a goal. This is formalizable. This is machine-like, right?
Yeah.
So Where does an organism, like a living system, diverge from this picture?
So first of all, I do think reinforcement learning is the strongest right content we currently have, which is extremely interesting and is formalizing exactly the problem of intelligence as a process of interacting with the world and both learning what to do and, well, doing it to reach an objective. How well does it currently fare in robotics? Because I think the fundamental argument would be that usually you still have small worlds, right? You have an abstracted environment that is still, well, in the computer, and then it is formalized what rewards are. It is not actually in a, right, like the body of a thing, but it is predefined, and it works. Right, there's a very small, like it's already all very predefined. I think that is the big argument, and I'm not up to date, but I think in robotics, like an actual interaction with the environment is still not as strong because of that.
Yes, that's true, but I would say it's because of technical reasons. It's
Mhm.
because we can engineer the policies. The policy means what to do in a given state. That's a function, especially for low-level motoric policies. If you
Yeah,
take Boston Dynamics, they engineer it with classical control, which is about this. So classical control has the same paradigm, but in reinforcement learning, we try to learn the policy from past experience just by, good dog, bad dog feedback. Like,
yeah,
did I achieve the goal? Did I not achieve the goal? Or how close am I to the goal? Whereas in control, the engineer actually thinks how to achieve the goal and the algorithm into the robot. And that approach, especially when you talk about real machines where there are a lot of things that are hard to model, so that classical control approach for low-level motorical tasks, I think it's still winning. But I know that Boston Dynamics is going into the reinforcement learning direction, especially for high-level planning. So when you have to chain low-level motoric actions to reach a higher level goal, like the robot maybe does the low-level stuff to walk. Walking is really hard stuff, and they needed 15 years to figure out how to do that. Actually, to walk is
yeah,
like a human.
yeah, exactly.
But then you can have a goal, like take this box and bring it there, and then like a chain of goals or maybe a final goal. It can use reinforcement learning for deciding what the steps to follow. And I think eventually the idea would be for scientific goal, for sure, the idea would be to do it completely from scratch, because that's the interesting question. Can the robot figure out how to walk as a baby does, like trial and error or imitation or just interacting with the world? Because that would be like a proof of concept for this kind of approach.
Mm.
The thing is that, as you said, that robots are still engineered physically. So that's,
Yeah,
for me, it's the big difference. Like their sensors are limited to whatever they can sense. You can make the case that us too. So this is where I'm getting like I'm trying to see the exact boundary where we are on this. But one of the claim you make in the paper is that like living organisms can sort of self-transcend, and they have a sort of goal of maintaining themselves, and
yeah,
then you sometimes you find very unusual solutions for certain problems that go out of the previous small world. So there is a sort of like direction how we extend the world
yeah.
we live in
Yes.
as we
So
grow or develop.
yeah, I think one simple differentiation that probably still applies is the saying that synthetic systems like a machine are complicated, but biological systems are complex. So they're fundamentally structured differently in their interconnectedness. And one already very old argument by, I think, Kant from, I think, already the 18th century is that in a biological system, every part is both means and end for each other part. because there's every part depends on every other part, and you also cannot take it apart, right? Like a machine, you can take it apart and then leave it around, put it together, and it works again. A biological system does definitely not work that way. But of course, it has other properties that are, well, more powerful. Like, for example, it can heal itself because it has this fundamental property of, or like functional structure of what Varela and Maturana call autopoietic, which means it brings forth their own structure continuously. So every part has the information of how to build and maintain the living system and how to maintain that fundamental organization. And this concept is very interesting and relevant because before there was the argument by Schrödinger in What is Life? And I think two of his main points, I'm not 100% sure, but one is just the process of like using energy and transforming it. And then the second one is basically reproduction. But like you can, a living system can create other living systems. But Maturana and Varela said, well, but actually reproduction is not needed, right? Like if I never choose to have children, I'm still alive, right? But what makes me alive? Like what is different about being alive than, well, a machine? And one argument is, of course, also that my goals are fundamentally in my own being and continue to maintain myself and being alive, which is different than having fully external ends. Yeah. And of course, you have then also secondary effects because of that, which is, I think, also from the extended evolutionary synthesis, this idea, for example, of niche construction. I'm not only surviving, but I'm also having a co-evolution with my environment, which means I'm also using my cognition to change my environment so I can easier maintain myself, which is, well, I think you could make the argument that, well, if we understand reinforcement learning well enough that you have this kind of instrument convergence that, well, a robot at some point would, for example, understand, oh, I have to keep close enough to a energy source, right? Or then, oh, I have to build energy sources close enough to where I am. I think you could make that argument. But for now, I still think living systems behave fundamentally differently than computational or artificial ones. At least we're very far away. I think I also have a different opinion than Yogi. I think Yogi, like Johannes Jäger, who is the main contributor of the paper, he takes, I think, the conclusion very literal, while I'm a bit agnostic about it. So I think our argument makes sense. I do think there's fundamental differences. I think there's fundamental limitations of what a computational system will be able to do. But also I see it more as exactly a dialectic where, well, I bring forth one perspective, but you show me, right? Like, prove me wrong, please. I mean, I know there's way smarter people on the other side that probably understand it better than me, and they will show me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I'm actually very close to you in that. So I was a bit skeptical about the main claim of the paper, and especially from my pragmatic point of view. I mean, of course, it's very important to make such a claim if you think it's true, because it will change a lot of philosophy and cognitive science. But even without that claim, there are a lot of things in what you guys are saying there: relevance realization, opponent processing. We will get into these, which could be super useful in reinforcement learning.
Yes.
So there's this paradigm there where you have this final goal, and maybe you have immediate feedback, and somehow you in your internal system you convert them into actions. It's usually a single goal, and
Yes.
you want to achieve it. Of course, you are not intrinsically defined that goal, it's given from outside, so there are a lot of differences. But even in the current system, for example, I find the opponent processing and relevance realization idea very, very interesting. So let's talk about, I know it's more John's work than yours, but let's like dialogically explain what those two are, because it really inspired me of thinking about new algorithms. So, and also because his argument is that relevance realization is not computational, which is very interesting itself. So let's talk about relevance realization. So what does it mean, and how does it work, and how does it relate to autopoiesis, like the systems that not only live but create themselves?
Okay, so I think for relevance realization, it makes sense to talk about relevance as something that's analogous to fitness. So what is relevant, or also what is, for example, salient in an environment, is not a stable class. So fitness, for example, is something that is continuously produced by organisms or agents interacting with an environment. And then, well, some things work and some things don't, or some things survive and some don't. And it depends on the environment, what currently is fit or what isn't. So, right, that there can be environments, I think even a famous evolutionary biologist once says his eyesight problems were actually increasing his fitness because it meant he didn't have to go to war because of them. So he was one of the only ones that survived, right? So what makes you more adapted to the environment is extremely context dependent. And similarly, what is relevant is basically, like, to a huge part, context dependent, right? So what I should do next really depends on my goals and what situation I find myself in. And this is different from, well, the axiomatic approach, but also the ecological approach to rationality, because the axiomatic approach says that, well, exactly, if you use Bayesian decision theory, or, well, you fundamentally adhere to logic, then, well, you can reach your goals. But of course, yeah.
No, sorry. So I just want to open a parenthesis on this, on Bayesian rationality.
Yeah.
Even in a small world. Because what I find super interesting, and I think that thing points towards something that has to be bigger than that formalism, is timescale. Even if you have a closed world with and a completely known uncertainties, so modeled uncertainties, not necessarily know what's going to happen, but you can sort of put a probability on what's going to happen.
Yeah.
When you want to optimize what you do, it depends on what time scale you're looking ahead.
Yes.
And the anecdote here is my history with Facebook, because this question actually very paradigmatically come up in social media and in general software-based products that evolve and that learn, which now most of them do. So social media, basically, they have to decide, their action is they have, what is the next post that they show you, right? It's a very simple decision. Of course, it's a huge space, so they have a lot of choices. In the beginning, that was hand engineered, like the low-level policy of the robots. They had some rules, and then you got some post, which were, the rules were very simple. It has to be of maybe your friend, you know, how close you are, like page rank, those kind of like engineered algorithms. A certain time when AI became bigger, these algorithms were replaced by machine learning. And instead of saying like what is the next post you will see, there was some kind of objective they wanted to optimize. And they were very happy because these objectives were in a higher space where like the product managers could talk about like what do we really want to do with the users. And things came out like engagement, like they measure the time you are on Facebook and they want to maximize this. So let's just stick with that. Of course, this formula, because it's a single formula, it has to be a single formula. It's an optimization algorithm. It's a mechanism, right? It's exactly not an organism. It has to be fixed. You cannot, if it's not fixed, then you have to you need something else you're optimizing. So at the end, you have one formula which is kept secret, right? Most of the time. But let's say it's just the time that they wanted you to be engaged on Facebook. Is it the next 24 hour you want me on?
Yeah.
Or the next week, or my lifetime, or maybe multiple generations, or the quarter. If you go like into finance, you have this, and the decision you have to make, it very much depends on that. And so the anecdote, I think in 2020, when TikTok came out and they got threatened by all these other players in the space. They started to do the shorts, and we know TikTok is actually was built on this technology that's very, very addictive. And so Facebook started to do this, and I got hooked on it. And I didn't like myself, so I got hooked on it. That means I really spent a lot of time, especially in the evenings where my frontal lobe was already on Facebook.
Yeah.
And then the day after I woke up and said, I don't like myself that did this. So what can I do? I just deleted Facebook. So they optimized me for the short term, but they lost me in the long term. And this made me think is that the actual, this problem, this single problem, even within this small world Bayesian framework, is unsolvable.
Yeah.
And so living organisms do go to opponent processing to find the right time scale to optimize it every moment somehow, right?
Yeah.
So this is my my parenthesis. I don't know if you have any comments on this. Like, this is my parenthesis on when people say Bayesian optimization or Bayesian rationality. Even in a small world, this little thing is already something that you cannot really deal with, right?
Yes. Yes. So what the optimization here, of course, itself was in a digital environment, right? But it tried to actually probably optimize something that was connected to the digital world, namely your behavior, right? In the end, it probably wanted you to stay online and well, probably also buy some things. And of course, often, especially the gap between the digital system and the the real world is where a lot of the interesting behavior comes in. I've just recently been to an event that was heavily on crypto, and we all had those encrypted passes that were like, super, super secure. But then I could have just given someone else my phone and they could have used it and walked in, right? Like it's right, like they were very, very like right, like the security is in the system, but the problem is between the system and the environment. But I agree also, even in the digital world, of course, right? Like exactly, right? You can behave differently, and even if you have one quantity that you want to optimize, it's still not perfectly specified what exactly that means, right? The meaning of time online. So if you conceptualize it short term, then you get very different content than if you think about it long term, and it's fundamentally different strategies.
Yeah, exactly. And the strategy, so where I think your argument that it becomes non-computational is that there is no thing, if the time scale is unknown,
Yeah.
because you're not living, or are you? I mean, maybe like companies are also fall in this category of organisms, but if you're not living, you don't have any way to decide yourself what the time scale is, for example. But time scale is just one of the examples of this kind of sort of meta things.
Yeah.
So I interrupted you on rationality, right? You have
I mean, I find the whole topic super interesting, because you fundamentally need a theory of what works, right, and what keeps people there. And I think for example, there was a big discussion around theory-free science and this expectation of, well, the answers will just passively fall out of the data. And that's, of course, again, the same problem of the frame problem, because you have to actively look at the data and generate a theory of what is going on there.
Or generate the data, right? Like you have to decide what experiment to run.
Exactly. And usually also there, the most important information is often not in the data, right? So if, let's say I have data on like behaviors of people online, I will often not understand it purely from the data, but because I have additional context, because I'm embedded in the real environment that those people are online, right? So if I see, oh, people buy a certain kind of trees in the winter, that's weird. Maybe I should sell different other trees. No, you have to understand it's Christmas, right? They want specific kind of trees because it is Christmas, which is a cultural event. It's not just, and then you can immediately discard all other ideas of selling other trees at the time because they want very specific Christmas trees, right? So, but the information is not, you have to infer that from the other things you know, which is usually not in the data.
Yes, so that leads to relevance realization. But because if I want to Stillman the counter argument, it would say that, okay, it's not in the data, but just collect more data. It's still a finite problem.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could try to sell other trees and then it wouldn't work, right? But precisely because you understand, like you can narrow in with the knowledge you have quite easily to, right? If you were in a marketing department, someone would be like, hey, let's try to sell this tree. You wouldn't be like, oh, let's try it. You'd be like, no, right? Because you just know there's
Yeah. But I mean, is that if you have to make a decision on
yeah,
restricted data
yeah,
and it's not working, one of the actions as an agent you can do is to extend the space you observe. So
yeah,
collect more data, not or necessarily for more users, but measure more things on the users you have
yes.
until the decision that you make matches what you want. So this is somehow leads to relevance realization, because this is what we do. But I think the main argument is that it's an infinite number of choices that you can do there. And
Yes,
yeah,
so
go ahead. Yeah.
exactly. You have this combinatorial explosion of options, and one abstraction of the world is never sufficient. So you always have to, right? Like you look through one abstraction. I guess you would say through one model, but you would also simultaneously check whether the model is correct and relevant for reaching your goals right now. So I think the example I'm given a couple of talks is, right, like let's say you play poker, and poker is something you can abstract from quite easily. And then there's also clear how to learn, or at least approximate game theory optimal moves, right? It is very complex, but it is kind of solvable, or relatively narrow in comparison to the rest of life. But you sit at a table and then you see, oh, suddenly there's some weird movement in the room, and you realize, no, the situation is not you having to win the game, but there's actually people that want to abduct you or kill you, and you no, the problem is not me winning poker, the problem is me running away, right? So suddenly the complete frame shifts from one situation to the other, and there's a complete shift of what is relevant to reaching your goals, from hey, I want to make some money, to wow, I want to survive, right? And so you have to have one lens, but simultaneously you notice where it just doesn't fit, and then you have this steep shift from one to the other, which is not right. It's not continuous. I don't even know how to say it precisely.
Yes, so that's the issue of computer games. Like you have a closed game, it can mimic a lot of things that make you happy, flow, narrative, hero's journey, etc. But when you close the computer, then you find yourself in the real world and you're depressed. It's John's one of John's uh, illustration of the meaning crisis. But so still, one of the point where I was a bit stuck is in the paper there is one argument which is around autopoiesis, and that self-creating systems have this intrinsic, what you mentioned in the poker game, these intrinsic goals of survival. And of course you have like a value hierarchy where winning the poker game is somewhere because you will earn money, and with earning money you will have a better life, you will eat better food or whatever you want to achieve. But when your actual existence is threatened, you go up in this value hierarchy and you save yourself. And that's related to a goal which is self-preservation. But still, that goal could be the goal of a robot without being autopoietic. You see what I mean? Like, that's, I don't know, rule number 2 of Asimov.
Yes,
You have to obey man, but the second one is that you have to self-preserve.
Yeah.
Where you don't harm man, you obey man, and you self-preserve. So it's among the rules, and that rule is an external rule in that world. So even if I think about the paperclip maximizer, right? Its goal is not to persist, but it does persist because that's one way to achieve its goal, right? So I'm still not sure I understand this jump between autopoietic systems, which it's a beautiful description in the paper, and I love it. This internal dance and with the external world and how everything is like evolving. But still, if if what is the actual argument there? If I just say robots can also have their self-preservation goal programmed in them, and it can be actually the top of their value hierarchy, besides actually bringing boxes from one space to another. If they are threatened, they can switch to that goal, and it's external.
Well, in theory. You're saying in principle, one day they will be able to do that with our current approach, right? If we go further down the road, but so far, of course, that's not the case, which would be the obvious argument to just make. Well, they aren't, right? Like organisms
Right now,
can
hierarchy,
currently, organisms can currently do all those things, right? They also continue, they continuously exist.
But
You
that
never shut them
argument,
off.
like if you 5 years ago you tell me that the GPT like LLM that's just predicting next word can do the stuff that can do today, I would have opened this way or told the same argument, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible, and it is. So that I don't see any metaphysical problems of imagining a robot programmed into it self-preservation. Like I will plug myself into the electrics outlet if I need more electricity, and if somebody wants to exterminate me, I will run away or fight or whatever we do.
Yeah. I totally see your perspective. I know there are really sharp arguments for the other side for this specific case, but currently I actually don't have them in my head. So I think I
Okay.
probably have to read the paper
Okay.
better myself.
Okay, so then let's talk about autopoiesis and opponent processing, because those are two things that so even without autopoiesis, I think we can talk about opponent processing. So what is it, and how does it differ? How is it different from what we usually do in reinforcement learning or optimization?
I mean, about autopoiesis we have already talked, which is the fundamental way how organisms or living systems are structured. And Varela would also talk about this bringing forth of a world of significance, which is very related to relevance realization, right? Like a small world of like meaning making. What does the world mean relative to me, and the actions and goals, like the actions I want to take and the goals I want to reach. So this is related to this autopoiesis that I create meaning and the world like an arena for me to find my path in as an organism. And opponent processing is the idea that that relevance realization is realized by different processes like dialectically bringing forth the continuous answer like of what is relevant. And again, I could jump in because I understand the literature. I think you could say, right, that certain computational systems do those things. Like, for example, when you read the paper by the computational rationality paper by Gershman and colleagues, there's, for example, the idea that value of one algorithm calculating the best possible answer of what to do. But simultaneously, there's one other part that basically screams of, well, but you have to stop and stop calculating and do something now because the opportunity cost and the environment are too large, right? So you can, I fully understand that you can make the argument that this is already realized. I think you probably have to ask John Ravecki what he would say against this, but he would usually point, for example, towards the biological structure of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, where you say, well, organism has different goals, for example, of relaxation versus activity that it has to balance, and well, it's dynamically created or how do you say it, realized by those two systems continuously playing against each other.
Yeah, no, I understand his proposal, and I love the opponent processing, because right now we most of the time have an objective and try to optimize it, and if we have multiple objectives, we make one objective which is a mixture of those objectives and optimize it. Sometimes we do optimization with constraints and we have two things, but it's still not this, I would call, like computational architecture, where because of the intrinsic contradictions between our goals, it's really hard computational to put the weight on those goals and then optimize this weighted mixture of those two goals. So the opponent processing for me, it's like, let's like fully optimize one of the goals. Let's have this like, I don't know, just explore, because exploration is good, but good if there is a lion there and will eat you. So let's also exploit our models of the predators and not go there. And then you have the exploration network and you have the exploitation network, and they constantly negotiate. And then it's, for me, it's even like it's plausible that algorithmically is a better solution for the trade-off problem than trying to mix it and then have an algorithm that tries to optimize the weighted sum, right? And so that this is why I like opponent processing, because it's even with the small world problem, it might be a good solution. So I'm just thinking about it, actually trying this.
So the idea here is that you have exactly multiple systems generating different answer and different heuristics, like they are mutually correcting each other, right? Because they propose different answers, and by interacting they mutually correct each other.
Yeah. And I think John's main argument on relevance realization is this circularity, which is repeated in the paper, but it's an old argument, I think, from 2012.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, which exactly I've heavily written about in the Rationality and Relevance paper that I have written substantially on, while the whole naturalizing relevance realization is primarily Yogi's work, but of course lots of arguments by the other co-authors as well.
So how does this circularity works? What is the argument there?
The circularity is exactly the problem, like the same as with which I said before with about fitness, right? Like usually it's circular because you would exactly this. What is relevant depends on the context, but it also depends on your goal. So it's this continuous, right? It depends on everything at any moment, and because of that, it's a constantly evolving and very different set of what that would mean, right? It's very hard to pre-specify what could be relevant.
Yeah, I know, but I think the non-computationality of it is that, I mean, I think the argument is that if you want to do relevance realization, like we call it feature selection, let's say. But feature selection in machine learning is usually from a finite set of features. You select a smaller set of features, whereas here you have an infinite world. And for being able to start to optimize or do inference or do Bayesian rationality, you have to select the world you will apply those tools in. And if you can define that problem, that selection problem, as an optimization problem, then it itself becomes a similar problem to the problem you want to solve. Again, you will have to find the relevant features for that problem of relevance realization. So this is how I see you get into this circularity argument, which says that it's not learnable or even computable in the classical way.
Yeah. So where I noticed the circularity strongly was in books. Like when I studied psychology, you would have subchapters in books on attention about salience, right? What is salient in an environment? And that is exactly the problem, because usually we say, well, bottom-up features, right? Like, oh, something that it's particularly colorful, or something that is, I don't know, particularly big. But then, of course, that's not true, right? Because sometimes something is salient that is, well, especially not colorful, right? There is no bottom-up feature that's externally given that makes something salient, but it's exactly this circular thing, right? It really depends on both the top-down and the bottom-up. So it's exactly this process between the environment, bottom-up, and the top-down, and it's this negotiation, because right, like if I'm at a party and the theme is wear something in neon color, right, then suddenly it's salient when somebody comes in a black suit, right? Well, usually I'm like, okay, nobody, like, okay, so, right, like suddenly this becomes salient because the context is so different. And this is exactly the circularity. There is no one stable set of salience, and there's no one stable set of relevance. It's the same of obviousness. And Tepofilin talks a lot about this, because there is nothing obvious ever. but something being obvious is something that is very actively created exactly by this, or like by context and top-down cognition. So it's generated.
Yes. So like even perception is like you have the model of the world and you project, and then the
Exactly.
world comes in and you negotiate
Exactly. And
errors. Right?
exactly. And this is, of course, why it is so relevant to bring it together with predictive processing, because of course, of what is interesting or relevant is exactly where something strongly diverges from what you expect, right? So that's what you notice the strongest.
And either you go somewhere else where you are familiar with the environment, or you change your model. So it's a pretty interesting meta choice, actually.
Yes.
So one interesting thing in the paper for me is that you go into a direction of ecology of agents and hierarchy within the agent, but also above the agent. And I really love this world where you have organisms that are themselves created or constituted by organisms. Like you are your cells, your organs, your tissues.
Yeah.
And then above, you have societies that are constituted by individual humans who have a relationship, and the whole thing is generated by the agent who makes an action that it's not only internal, it has an effect on the environment. As soon as you have an effect on the environment, you start relating to other agents. So I'm wondering if I don't really see like a big boundary between, let's say, a human, the concept of organism applied to a human or to a cell or to society. And there are two questions that arise for me. Is that one is, where does it stop when we go down? And this is like Michael Levin's big question of where agentiality or agential starts and where physics ends, or mechanics ends, where he talks about the thermostat, which is a very simple agent. And because if we talk about like this is really constitutive to the ontology of how the world works, this agential thing, then his argument is about the zygote, that from basically a cell, or the cell is also some kind of organism, goes into a full-blown human, and somewhere there we gain a lot of capacities, but there's no real black and white point where let's say relevance realization starts. It's already somewhere in the lowest level. So that's would be my first question, is like it really, the paper really cuts the world, as that's what you started with, right? To living things and physical non-living things. But where is the edge? Where is the border between the two? And
yeah, I think so. Again, right, you can make just like very zoomed out arguments. So, for example, again, I would say a thermostat has no agency, like zero. And one very easy example you could just make right now, if you just imagine all humans were gone, how long do you think the machines would continue running? They are 100% grounded in humans right now. 100%.
Yes.
Like no question. Basically, all artifacts we have, they run on a biological substrate right now. They run on us, right? There's zero question about it, because it's absolutely clear that they would stop running. Maybe we've built some that like have more power, but their activation still comes from humans that have prepared all the maintenance already for longer in the future, right? I think I'm sure there are some systems that we have prepared like that, but still, like all of that stems from humans. Well, living systems, they would just continue doing their thing, and they would also evolve, and they would also, like, for example, change their environment if it's no longer, like, if they could no longer live in it, right? They do many things that machines just don't do, and there's just so of course you can go into nitty-gritty, but like if you zoom out, there's like huge differences. But in terms of the nitty-gritty of where relevance realization starts, again, I think you should just invite Johannes Jäger on, because he has strong opinions on that. I have less strong opinions on that, and I'm also way less in the literature when it comes to the difference of biological agency. I think it's just something I'm not super passionate about personally. I mean, it's
Makes sense.
interesting, but it's
Makes sense.
not.
But let's talk
Yeah,
about the machines that are run on a biological substrate, because that leads also to very interesting questions. Like my neighbor's argument against singularity is that, well, you just turn it off when it misbehaves, right? And that it's sort of like it's possible because they depend on us, right?
yeah,
But what if? So that I do, because I'm trying to Stillman. I don't really
yeah.
think in the exponential takeover and the doom. But if I try to Stillman them, I see two avenues. What is the one is that they actually learn how to create or self-manufacture.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, they will mine the silicon and they make their chips and then they build themselves from bottom up. Again, what so would there be an argument that it's not possible, or is it just that it will take a lot of time, so we have time to adopt?
So personally, I'm not worried about the singularity, but emotionally, I can very much understand it. But just when you ask me the question and you imagine what could happen, it's very interesting because I can exactly feel my embodied cognition come online. Right, like my body's like, but what if? It's super strong as a narrative. Yeah, with my current understanding, I'm still doubtful that like these narratives make sense. I think they often they actually have a lot of concepts from basically religion about ideas of omniscience that I just don't see happening because of fundamental limits of knowledge. But also precisely because I've been in the effective altruism community and have debated all those AGI takeoff scenarios for so long. I think I'm a bit burned out by it, and I'm just like, I'm just glad someone else is worrying about it. From my current vantage point, I mean, I'm obviously worried about, like, we have real AI systems that get more powerful. It is good that people think about it. But then those extreme theological conceptualizations, I don't buy.
So usually, yeah, okay. So you it's not on your salience landscape, let's say.
Yes, exactly. Not because, I mean, again, I think it's good that some people think about it. I think, I think it's I think it actually reminds me a lot of this idea of parasitic processing of ideas, because it just draws you in so much when you think about it, right? People actually said this about probability theory as well, right? Like once they thought about it in probability, they couldn't stop. Like there's a huge account of like how just ideas suck people in. And I think AGI and this idea that this could be the case is very parasitic, which, well, if it's actually a problem, then it's good that many people get sucked into it and work on it. But when I just hear it and feel how my body reacts to it, and I'm just like, yeah, I think I take a step back because I just feel like it wants my attention too much.
Yes, yes, I see very well what
So
you mean.
I'm not really going into the discussion right now, but I'm like talking more about like what the topic does to me, and I find it very
Yes, no,
interesting.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's the right. Uh,
And that
that's the
also,
right
yeah.
move, actually.
No, I
Everything.
mean, again, whether it was the right move, you will learn in retrospect whether, well, how things turned out might have been exactly the wrong move. No.
Yeah, because I see a lot of fear and anger coming up when these
Yeah,
topics coming up, especially the fear is obvious, but the anger is there because you should take, of course I'm worried, but you should be worried too. And if you're not worried, I'm angry
yeah,
at you.
yeah. Yeah, and that's actually so because now we've talked a lot about biology, but this like meta topic is way more of what I'm interested in, right? Like how we
Ah,
construe the world, then like insights into, right, like shifting from one frame to the other, where you are able to well step back and act differently, like those very psychological questions, and a lot of like also how perception uh, yeah um uh, figures into all of this, right? Like how we can, well, when we learn something, we perceive the world as fundamentally differently. And for example,
mm,
how
mm,
how things that when you for the first time experience certain things, they just are. But once you've experienced them multiple times, you can make sense out of them, and then you can step out and observe them, right? So because of multiple times observe discussions like this, I'm like, aha, right, okay, I could now go into discussion, but I can also notice, aha, it's one of those topics that like that are too, I don't know, like they feel very, I guess, like inflammatory, you could say, but like they just suck you
They
in.
draw
And
you
because
in, yeah.
I've experienced this multiple times, I now have this category of ideas like that I'm a bit skeptical about, because they do certain things to your brain.
Ah, okay. So you have this meta stance that you don't want to feel the way you feel when
Yeah.
you think about it.
So another topic where I have a similar reaction to is in general, I think, meta ethics, meta ethics, or just ethics. I feel like, I've seen many people getting so sucked into it that they, in the end, stopped acting at all. And I just feel like when you just stop doing anything, then that must be the wrong answer.
And it's interesting because both of these things are framing in issues, right?
Yeah.
It's and that's goes back to our first question on rationality, that you can be like super intelligent within your framework or of rationality or framework of meta ethics, but your life around you is just collapsing because it sucks you in.
Yeah. For example, right, which can be highly irrational, but
So
it can also be highly rational, right? If this is actually the most important problem right now, you can actually do something about it. It might be the right thing, but well, it depends.
it depends, and for that question, there's no computational solution, right?
Yeah.
So what are you doing these days? So what occupies your mind, and what what's next?
What's next? So I still intend to actually get a PhD at some point. Let's see how that is going. Other than that, I'm thinking about many topics, and I feel like at the you can always verbalize it best after the fact. So while you're actually like grappling with something at the edge, it's often like a felt sense where you're just like you can't even completely say what you're doing. And that's how it feels with many topics. But
Mhm.
yeah, topics I'm very interested in. So I think there's, for example, I still think you can completely, because of the topic of insight, I think you can completely unify the whole naturalistic decision-making framework with the whole predictive processing and relevance realization framework. I don't know whether you know the naturalistic decision-making, but it's exactly
No, but
this
go
idea.
ahead,
Yeah,
explain.
right. So it's, I would say, a way less algorithmic approach. It's by Gary Klein, and it's about this idea of how experts actually acquire insights into problem domains in real life. So how also firefighters make very complex, fast decisions, and then often have, like, for example, insights that nobody else could have had. And then Gary Klein really elaborates what were the conditions necessary so they could have those insights. And it's very, like, way more 4E, I would say. I think he never uses that word, but it's way more about situatedness, but also coupling with the environment, right? Like, so you have to get a lot of domain knowledge in your head, because you cannot connect the dots if you don't know the dots, right? But I think it really connects well, because it also, one of the books is literally called Seeing What Others Don't. Right, you can see something in the environment that someone else cannot see. Well, because you know a lot that others don't, if you're an expert, and then you can connect dots that others cannot connect. Right. So
Yes.
if a historian, for example, looks at current, like, world events, he can say, well, this has happened many times before, and then it would turn out like this, and this, right? So they have already some constraint to the problem space, because, well, things usually do not turn out completely different. They might, because we have different technology now, right? But also, like, societal problems, like civil, like, unhappiness or unrest, or think, or like living prices problems, like, they have similar effects on populations. And then, well, a historian will have probably some intuition of where this will lead. That, well, the average person that has never thought about bigger patterns, longer patterns, they just can't have any insights, because they haven't seen it. For them, it's the first time, in a sense, because they haven't processed this information.
So I hear a little bit how those the four P's interact. The propositional, how it becomes perspectival
Yeah.
after it. So it's almost like a qualitative change of knowing. I don't know what initiates it, but let's say propositional, you accumulate a lot of knowledge about fire and what things, and then you also do stuff and learn procedurally what to do, and at a certain moment then it generates insight. So what is his insight in generating insight? How does it work? Why somehow this quantitative accumulation of knowledge turns into a different perspective for a historian or a firefighter? What are the current
I think
for that?
I don't remember how he makes the point, but it's in general the idea of expert intuition and expertise. And well, the argument is exactly, I would say, this coupling between you and the environment,
I see.
right? Like the idea of, well, if you're in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, and in the master's mind, there's only one, right? So again, like even like the idea of like simple heuristics, right? But simplicity you have to generate. Right, and the same as when you just mature in general, right? That you can already often say how things will turn out. You can see it even in the environment. So, right, like let's say you have a teenage daughter and she brings someone home, and he's like, right, like he takes a bit of drugs. He's like very, I don't know, like very cool. But you can already tell, well, she kind of wants to have a good life and everything. So she's like, no, we're totally in love, and you're like, yeah, we'll see, right? Like, and then you already know. In a year, she'll figure out, no, actually, I want to have a life. I will probably want to go to university. This wasn't the right thing. And you could already see it because you already know, right? Like, this is just not going to work. But she doesn't know because she hasn't seen those things yet. She's just like, right, having the overwhelming emotion or something, right? Like, so you see many patterns because you've seen things play out. And usually, I think in daily life, we have this just a lot that you already see, I don't know, two co-founders, so you can already say, it's not gonna work, right? Or just like you have the sense of, right, that no, but you couldn't say why, but like of course that's exactly this. There is just one possibility. It's right.
Yeah, you see the futures sort of. I mean, one thing it reminds me is that when you do this and you anticipate, so that's also in the paper, the anticipation machine we all have.
Yeah.
It's not a simple prediction, but almost like a prophecy. When you are an agent who can act in the world, the way you imagine the future, it's not a passive perception or perceptive forecast, but you project it there and you realize it. So that's why, for example, I find those doom scenarios so dangerous. Because as more and more people start believing in them, they will self-create them in weird ways, like
I agree.
Greek drama. And that's why I love John's projections, because he says that these are not forecasts, these are like
prophecy.
Prophecies and threshold points where we have agency to decide to go this way or that way, and we should go the right way, of course. And foreseeing that these points will come is easy.
One concept here is the idea of reflectivity or reflexivity. Which one is it by Soros? Just that you're like markets already incorporate predictions about the future. The ideas about the future are part of the environment now, so people will act on them, which also makes it harder to predict many things, right? Because I could say, well, I really think this one thing will kill us all, and then of course I can. Then you could say, well, but it didn't. Well, because everyone realized it will kill us, so everyone worked against it, right? Because people fundamentally take into account what the future will bring.
Yeah. But again, this gets to an equilibrium in a small world, and of course we don't live in the small world. That's why it's not possible to even with the full information and everybody's betting the right beliefs. There will be things that are going out of the probability we use.
And there's many people that would now argue by now with actually some ideas like faith, right? That actually just like having some fundamental just hope and faith is just useful. Because exactly that, if you just really think we're really doomed, this will have a disastrous second order effect, which you can already see. There's many people that decide to no longer have children because they believe those stories.
And that's the end, right?
Exactly. And then if you have less people, like all the things that are good in the world depend on humans. So if we just Well, don't
Absolutely.
reproduce.
No, I completely agree. And faith is typically non-propositional. You think it is if you are in a small world, but then it turns out it's not. It's you live it, you enact it. That's one
Yes.
of the E's, right? You enact your faith, and that's how it becomes reality. So
Yes, and it can also mean, right, like, oh, I can not yet see the path forward, but I also know I just don't know everything, right? There are many solutions or ways in which, well, things work that I just don't know. So because there is more in the world, there might be a way, right? You can make this step as well.
beautiful. So I had one more like meta question is like,
Mhm.
how did you end up a cognitive scientist? So what was your path like, or how do you see yourself making these choices? Why didn't you become like an astrophysicist or let's say a psychologist who sees patients or something you know in the ballpark. So what do you think about your own choices in this you know a lot about the metacognition framework, so
Yeah.
how do you fit into that?
So there's multiple things there's an infinite way of possibilities of what I could say. But I would say, first of all, it was very unlikely that I would study a science at all. So as a teenager, I was primarily very creative. I wanted to be an author, right, like very like non-scientific. And then one thing I remember as a child was in school, a teacher once, like in a normal class where they just teach us facts, he just randomly told us the story of little bugs on trees, and then some factory colors the trees differently because there's some substance that's on them, and because of that, some bugs that have a certain color die out and the others don't. And I remember that I was like, wow, right? Like, it was the idea of evolution, right? Of natural selection. I remember that back then, even I was just hooked on the idea, and I just understood there are some ideas that are just way more powerful than others. And I was really interested in, like, there must be places where you can find more of those ideas that are very powerful because they explain a lot more than, right, like individual facts that you learn. And I think when I look back, then that was one of the most realized, wow, that was very different from this very like individual facts that you learn in school. And I remember that even as a child, I realized that, right, like I was grappling with it afterwards. I was like, I want more of this.
Like the
And then
depth.
Exactly. And then I actually wanted to go to university partially because that was, well, where I just did not have much skill. I was very like creative, very emotional. Like, I just want to become a clear thinker because that's where I, right, like, obviously can learn the most and extend myself the most. But then another point I could also make is, I think deep down I've always felt like a psychologist, because even without learning about psychology, I was really, really thinking a lot and very actively about how humans think about the world. So I think even in my teenage years, I would ask people like, so how do you think, like, what is your worldview, right? Like very, very deep questions, because I just found it extremely interesting what answers people would give. So in a sense, I've always been like that, but of course not educated in the actual cultural like ideas and methods. And then I did study psychology, but I studied psychology during the time of the replication crisis.
That was a specific time. I thought it was like
No, I mean, but like during that time, I mean, I think there's
when it
always
was
crisis in
discovered.
science, right?
Uh-huh.
But I remember it was exactly during my undergraduate degree, where a lot of it got very public, and it was like, wow, I can again like forget everything I learned
I
basically.
see.
And what I got really interested in was the statistical methods, and then I basically wanted to learn more formal methods, and that's why I wanted to do cognitive science, because I felt like it's just more, like, there's just more theory behind how things work. And it turns out my program was way more philosophical than, well, teaching me how to program things. But I'm also, in retrospect, very grateful about that.
It's so funny because for me, cognitive science was in the other direction from engineering.
Mm,
I did go to seminars during my engineering
yeah,
school in the 90s where the symbolism versus connectionism debate was at the highest level. It
yeah,
was so social science to me
yeah,
compared
yeah.
to what we learned in, like, I don't know, time series or signal
Yeah, no,
processing.
it makes sense. I think it feels still more technical than psychology, which is, I think, in its method still
I
relatively
see.
simple. In psychology, you usually measure two things and you look whether they're correlated.
I see,
is
I
just
see.
not super sophisticated. I mean, I don't want to discredit it. Like, there's a lot of actual amazing psychology, but still, like, cognitive science tries modeling, right? A cognitive modeling. You have to have some understanding of artificial intelligence to even understand what an artifact can or cannot do, or like even basic ideas. I mean, of course, in the end, you do philosophy about them, but if you haven't even heard about the big O notation before, then you really embarrass yourself if you want to talk about machines, right? It's
Yeah, by the way, that reminds me to one of the questions I had before that I wanted to ask you. You said cognitive science makes models compared to psychology, and there's this famous last sentence of Feynman on the whiteboard is that if I can't create it, I don't understand it. So this kind of like engineering paradigm, which I love, by the way, and I see. I'm not sure if Friston makes a explicit argument on this, but I understand his stuff a little bit like that. That the models we do in AI today are mostly predictive, black boxish, and the models that we have are more constructive. So when we project, we don't project like the nerve neurons, 3D systems that are running in, the self-driving car pipeline. They are just trying to learn rays in 3D about from 2D images, and that's how they reconstruct the 3D world. Whereas we have in our mind objects in the world and we put them together, and then we sort of render it and project it on the world and measure the error. So I see a lot of power in that statement of models that not only sort of surface representation predictions, but also constructive, and they manipulate the same kind of concepts in our head than we have in reality. So, and somewhere in some interviews you said that you wouldn't sign up or you wouldn't agree with that statement of Feynman. So I'd like to understand this a bit better, what you meant.
Actually, I don't remember in what context I said it and in what and how I meant it back then. And overall, I think it's a great idea, right? Just as a motivation to understand something so well that you can build a central function that it has. That's exactly the idea of the science of the artificial, right? We want to understand intelligence by trying to build it, and then through the process of trying to build it and observing how it behaves naturally, like learn about both, basically, about the machines and the concept of intelligence. But I think there's many situations where understanding something doesn't lead to you being able to build it. So a lot of it is embedded, right? So I think also historically, again, there have been many scientists that already had really good ideas of how you could build certain things. But of course, if there's just no infrastructure or right, like other parts that are necessary just don't exist yet, then you still can't build them. So what you're
But
able
it's
to
still
build,
useful to have that kind of model, which is not
yes, exactly.
constructible.
You
I see.
imagine what you would do if you had other machines to then, right, like build this part and build this part. But whether you're able to build it often depends on just the current technological advancement in general. And this can also mean that I think there's many past artifacts that we no longer can build now because other parts of the infrastructure no longer exist. So right there is also past knowledge that again just vanishes because, well, the necessary embedding for the creation is no longer there.
Yeah.
So, but then also a lot of the knowledge of how to build something is collective. So to my knowledge, there's nobody who can build a laptop like with all like
That's
with the whole software, right? Usually one person is responsible, like but like for every little part, someone else is responsible, and then there are some people that have some like higher abstraction of how the things fit together, but they then don't know how the subparts work. So even there, nobody. I mean, the famous story of the eye pencil, of how even the idea of building a pencil is highly collective, and no individual person can actually build a pencil from scratch, right? So, well, it's a very abstracted idea of if I can't build it, then I cannot. Yeah.
I see.
What I
So you
cannot
can
build, I do
understand
not
a
understand.
pencil without you yourself being able to build it.
Yes,
I
but
see.
yeah, but and a lot, like even if I say a sentence like, "Oh yeah, we know how to do that," I actually mean something collective. Right? Like, I mean, we as humanity, I cannot do that. I don't even know how to program a
But
right?
that's it's so interesting because it goes back a little bit. I didn't go to the direction because I forgot it. But when we go in this autopathic systems and organisms higher than, let's say, the human level, and we look
yeah,
at organisms like
yeah,
real companies that
yeah,
know how to build a laptop and
yeah. Then you would
even
even say
like
like,
a
who
music
knows it,
band. Say
right?
it again.
Then you would even say, who knows it, right? Like, how is the information actually not distributed in the, yeah. Anyway, sorry, what did you want to say?
Yeah, so my point would be that those things seem to be organisms too,
It is a
like the
valid
companies.
metaphor.
And is it, or it's real?
Um,
What is missing from the organism theory from those organisms within this theory?
well, that you like individuals can theoretically walk away and then still survive individually and do their own thing afterwards, which
So
is a bit different from one, like, I don't know, human, where, well,
yeah, so
one leg
their
cannot,
boundary is more
yeah,
fluid than ours.
no,
But
but
I
it,
can lose my skin cells too, and some of my cells can decide to go cancer or just leave. They have some agency too within my body,
sure,
and
but
my
yeah,
liver has some functioning that is independent of me myself certain way. So definitely there's a quantitative difference
but it
because
depends on the rest of the body to survive. Which you can also say for a company in a very loose definition, but I would say like less tightly
no.
coupled than in a body. No.
uh, I look at the company, it has HR, it has engineering, let's say software company, it has
Yeah.
product management, and they all depend on each other.
Oh yeah,
And
they
you,
do, but yeah, yeah, but I mean like the sub part, like right, like the humans still go home after their work, and then they could also quit and then join a different company, which just
yeah,
like
but
in,
okay,
but
but
like
isn't that the very
okay, you
point
could
of
say,
the
and you could say you can have an organ transplant. Okay.
no, 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 wait, no.
So it's
Isn't the very point of the paper is that the physical constitution of the organism constantly changing. It's a dynamic system. The molecules are going in and out.
they are
What is
sure.
maintained is the this higher order
Yeah,
codes
sure.
of
Yeah. No, I mean,
self-maintenance.
I agree with you, right? Like that a organization has some kind of structure that exactly does not depend on individual, like the substance. If you say the humans are the substance and not an organ, then sure, you could make that argument for sure.
Hmm.
If you just say they're kind of the energy or yeah, sure. No, I mean, again, I think it's a valid metaphor.
Okay. Yeah, I
And
mean,
all
I love to play with this idea so that's why I'm bringing in, and maybe it's a metaphor, but if it's not.
and also similarly, like organizations have their own meaning making, right? They usually have a vision of
Yeah,
what they want to
like
do,
us,
and then also sorry.
like us.
Yeah,
Humans,
exactly,
like
exactly,
individuals. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So
They
it's a
have
similar thing. Yeah.
then they have very like they interact with the world in a very interpretive world way, right? They have because they have certain ideas of what should be happening and what is important and what isn't. They also conceptualize the world through the lens from their own vantage point. What is good, what is bad,
Yeah.
yeah, and
When
what
they
things
die,
mean.
there is evolution. Yeah. So there are a lot of similarities, and I don't think it has been worked out. I think, I
Yeah,
mean, like, because of the we have sociology working on that, but they don't have the
yeah.
relevance realization framework yet.
Yeah.
There's
Actually, I had one more point about the thing we discussed before with
yeah.
the building and understanding. That also I think in Greek there's two different terms for this actually, which is episteme and techne,
Uh-huh.
where one is like basically well knowledge, abstract knowledge, and the other is art or craft,
Yeah.
which also again means right like you can understand something theoretically versus you know how to do it,
Do
which
it.
are
Yeah.
two different ways of knowing something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like the two propositional versus procedural completely.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one last thing on this is that Michael Levin also has this example, but I love to think about that too. Like, okay, your neurons, those are basically like sophisticated amoeba, like
Yeah.
big cells that, of course, are embedded in the larger system of you. But they have their internal world and they have their sensors and they live in a substrate where they are alive, right? And they have their friends. If you look at the actual video of a neuron, it's super funny because it's really like,
they have quite complex behavior, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So what do they think about me, my neurons,
They probably don't know that you exist.
Yeah. So we would, so the metaphoric or funny stories like okay, they probably constantly argue. There are the atheist neurons who say, we are just here in like swimming in this ocean and there's nothing above, like something bigger than us.
Yeah.
And then are those ones that are like theists who believe in me, that I exist, That's such an interesting idea.
Well, that is anthropomorphized. But it's pretty funny.
Actually, is it anthropomorphizing or is it just applying the organism theory to that level? Of course, they cannot talk. That in that sense, they are anthropomorphizing, and so in that sense, it's a cartoonish picture of what would they do if they could think that.
Exactly.
But it's sort of like the same way we cannot really think about or imagine how like an organizational consciousness exists. Is it metaphorically or not? It's a different realm. So
you're asking about the Umwelt of a neuron, right? Like, what is the meaning world of a neuron?
And an organism.
Yeah.
Like a company. Anyway, so this is what I'm really excited about. Like just thinking about it, even if I cannot build it. It's an interesting space.
Definitely. Yes.
Okay, well, it's 1 hour 40 minutes.
Amazing! Wow, I didn't even notice
that. But it was fun, and so usually I ask my guests to ask me one question at the end of the discussion. So what would it be? What would you like to know?
Also, so many questions. What got you initially into technology? Probably someone has asked that before, but
not at all. Most of the time they ask why I got into podcasting.
Oh, okay.
But I like the question. Let's see. So I went into a very selective high school in Hungary in the 80s, like just before the wall came down. And it was still very like Prussian, very strict. We have the Prussian system in Hungary. It's very formal and strict, and it was a high school which selected kids at 14 from all around the country. So, and it was the main topic was physics. So I got into this high school. I was actually I had this sort of like, it's called the MIT effect, maybe, like American kids who are best in their city and they go to the MIT and suddenly they are not the best anymore. So I got this at 14. I had really like genius guys in my class, and like half of them are professors now in US. So it's in a certain sense like IQ level was really high, and so we were in this sort of like culture of like Olympics, math and physics, and very very left hemispherish, nerds.
Very competitive.
But everybody was a nerd, so sort of like it was better than before when I was alone. And then towards getting to graduate, I sort of always had this thing like vacillating between maybe like my two hemispheres. So I stepped out of a little bit of this nerdish existence and asked myself, like, what do I want to do? Actually, one of the things I did, I chose to do my army service in 88, which wasn't obligatory. I could have chosen to do it after university, but I felt so much sort of like stuck in that cerebral world, that I said,
Yeah.
okay, maybe the army will pull me out, and that of course it didn't happen. That's like one of those things where your predictions are completely wrong. So
What happened instead?
well, I was bored,
Oh, okay. Was it just
and
not that
everybody was
challenging?
bored because there was no. It was a
Oh,
peace army, so like we were pretending to do.
oh
I
no.
mean,
Okay.
with Ukraine things, it's coming back because we were sort of preparing for a war like what's happening in Russia today
Yeah.
with the exact same hardware. By the way, it's so funny.
Wow.
Like I know all the tanks that I up to 80 that are used there, which is scary, and that, I mean, I have a lot of feelings about that. But anyway, so I decided to join the army before the university, but before I had to make that choice of what you're asking, like why did I choose engineering? And basically the choices were like, is it physics or engineering?
Hmm.
Like I couldn't think about anything else at that time. Like it was not like, you know, I wouldn't have been open for like a psychology path, even though today I'm very much interested in that.
Yeah. It's, by the way, the other way around as well, right? Like I couldn't imagine ever going into engineering,
Uh-huh.
but now I'm interested, right? But it's the opposite. And
And
I
it's
mean,
so, yeah, it's so
one
interesting. Yeah,
one could
this.
make some gender arguments here, but we'll leave that aside.
Yes, but I don't know. Psychology is pretty 50-50, no? I don't know.
Yeah.
Huh? I don't know. So actually, so I went into engineering instead of physics because I thought that physics, like if you don't make it in science, then you're stuck.
Yeah.
Which is of course not true. You go
Yeah.
into engineering now, but at that
Yeah.
time it wasn't so clear that it was possible. I saw the physicists who were really super minds, and I thought maybe I won't be in the top 1%, and then
Yeah.
what? And so I thought like engineering school is you can still do science if you want, and I ended up doing it, but you
Yeah.
still you have a backup plan. You just become a software engineer. And I also love to construct things.
Yeah.
So software engineering is, my father is a mechanical engineer. My son is into woodwork, so he's also very manual and constructing stuff, and I'm stuck between them in this like cerebral world of software. But that's also some, we do structures. So that was another reason I liked the idea to do computer science, which was very new at that time,
Yeah.
as a discipline. It was electrical engineering actually, and it was part of it. So that's how I went into it. But then the university, the courses I remember were the one course per semester that we had to take out of the discipline. That was
Yeah. Yeah.
sociology and film aesthetics and cognitive science actually,
Yeah.
that I forced myself to do because it was too, at that time, and in that particular course it was I didn't understand half of it. Like the terms were so esoteric to me. Like your
From other
paper is
disciplines.
beautifully written, by the way. It's very deep, but if somebody, you don't really have to be an expert in cognitive science to understand it.
Yeah.
Whereas that time, I mean, maybe I also picked it up, but that time, I mean, half of the terms I didn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes
But
some time.
anyway, so this is how, it was. I was always between, at least in my mind, between these two worlds. But then I did my PhD in computer science, and I went into AI, so it became very, very technical. But I was always interested in the softer side of life.
Yes. Very curious. Very different path.
Yeah, then it's funny that, as you said, we can converge from these two directions and
Yeah.
meet in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Learning about just interdisciplinary communication was one of the strongest part of the program, because
Ah.
they put people with very different backgrounds together, right? Like some people in
Mhm.
class would have an engineering background and some philosophy, and one I think came from film. And then I think we had many arguments, and we all were often like very frustrated with each other. And intrinsically, at least I was always wondering, like, when are we finally starting with this interdisciplinarity? And then, of course, in retrospect, this very frustrating experience where you feel like you cannot actually talk to each other yet. That's the
Mhm.
problem, right? Because disciplines are not or like just looking at this phenomenon, this, and it just fits together, but they have very different frameworks and ways of looking at things, and then you actually have to understand enough to even translate it. But it's not just puzzle pieces. It's very a lot of new construal that actually has to happen so it can fit together.
Yes, but at the same time, it's such a productive culture if you have this, because just by talking to somebody else from another discipline, you have something new.
Yes.
Whereas, most of the time you are forced into smaller disciplines where you do deep stuff, but there is no integration. That's one of John's point, is that integrative research is less well evaluated or respected in. So, and I'm sort of like naturally that kind of person. I like to integrate stuff from different things, even if it's none of those pieces are new. The actual combination is new. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Anna. It was great fun to talk to you.
It was also a lot of fun to talk to you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
And let's maybe later I recontact you, because there are so many other things to talk about, and let's see where it goes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you as well, and see you on Twitter.
Yes.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.